Welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, February 2nd. Today we'll be discussing jet stream level winds, surface level pressure, significant wave heights, and all the things that go into making surf in the North Pacific Ocean. And then, of course, a look at snow and long-term forecasts, what's going on with the MJO and El Nino. Let's get to work. Looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean, we see a fetch producing 26-foot seas off of Vancouver Island, but not doing a whole lot. This is mostly associated with high pressure building in the Gulf of Alaska. Also, we see a broad gale producing 32-foot seas aimed north, just east of the dateline, and mixed seas in the 28 to 30-foot some range on the backside of this gale, and that is aimed somewhat at Hawaii. All right, let's get into the details. As usual, we'll start by looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales when they do form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a dip in the jet stream, just like we have right here. And you see we have winds, what is that, about 150, 160 knots, pushing pretty solid off of southern Japan, reaching to the dateline, but then the jet stream splits. You see, part of it going off to the north, part of it going to the south, and in between that split flow, typically you get high pressure, whereas in a trough, you typically get a counterclockwise flow aloft and down at the surface. And of course, this is the sign of low pressure. Low pressure generates winds. Winds generate seas. And seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area, turn into swell. Swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. All right, so the main area for swell production as of right now is from the, we'll say, from the dateline and west of there. And that's as of Sunday, 12Z. We'll put this into motion. You see, basically the same pattern continues into Monday. The trough digs out a little bit more, and we know there is already sort of a broad gale-like structure here over the dateline. That should continue into Monday. Notice winds starting to build off of Japan. And the split continues east of the dateline as well as we get into Tuesday. Now the trough starts washing out on Tuesday, so that gale will probably finish off. Winds build to 180 knots in the jet off of Japan on Wednesday into Thursday. Another small trough right there starts digging out. You also notice that the ridge starts pushing inland a little bit, so that would suggest that the wind pattern along the California coast will calm down some at that point in time. New trough continues to build Thursday into Friday off the Kuril Islands, looking pretty solid into even almost Saturday. Then it too sort of breaks apart, and it almost looks like the jet's going to start, the split point's going to retrograde the whole way back to the dateline, sure enough, and then another trough digs out 180 hours from now, or let's say late next Sunday, over the Kuril Islands. So the potential for, we'll call it 3 gales, all isolated to the West Pacific, while high pressure just completely has the East Pacific Gulf of Alaska completely locked down. So let's take a look at surface level pressure and surface level winds, see what effect the jet stream will have on them. As we know right now, a broad gale, you can see it filling almost the entire central North Pacific Ocean. But notice, fetch in the eastern part, remember, here's your high pressure, 1040 millibar high pressure. Pretty bulletproof, that strong high pressure. You see winds building along the California coast. That is preventing the low from moving east any. South winds, gradient between the high pressure, which is circulating clockwise, and the low pressure counterclockwise. As these systems get closer together, the winds build, but they're all aimed north at Alaska. Yeah, 40-knot winds right in that area. Maybe some little sideband swell will travel to the east, but not a lot. And then we're looking for fetch mainly aimed at Hawaii. We see 35, 40-knot winds, and sort of generally in this area, in the western half of the storm, aimed at Hawaii. Good for making some swell there. Put this into motion. That basically the pattern continues Sunday, then Monday. The low, I guess, gives the opportunity to push this high a little bit more to the east, but you can see winds continue along the California coast. But relative to Hawaii, 30, 35 knot winds continue aimed at the Hawaiian Islands, producing probably some swell. Then we get into Tuesday, and the new gale starts developing, 40, almost 50 knot winds, continuing pushing towards the date line as we get into Wednesday with, we'll call it a good solid 45 knot fetch, not over a huge area. And then later on Wednesday, it starts fading as yet another gale starts building off the Kuril Islands. Actually a storm, 55 knot winds there for a little bit. Now this one just holds over the West Pacific as we get into Thursday night and Friday with 45 knot winds. I mean, that'll make swell, but it's a long ways away from both Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast, so it would be, relative to California, you're thinking 20, 25 minutes in between sets when they do come, since it's not a huge system. These relatively smaller waves, maybe a decent number of waves per set, longer period, but nothing, really spectacular. Relative to Hawaii, a little bit less of a weight, but still nothing like pushing down. You really want storms pushing toward, if you live in Hawaii, towards your location. So a storm falling in this direction, or relative to California, just sweeping east across the Pacific. All right, so we get into Saturday, and even that system fades out, and yet another system is supposed to build a week out on Sunday. But again, this is the same sort of deal. What do we have? Two, like a double-lobed high-pressure system here. Remember, the jets split, so this is to be expected, and it quickly gets shunted to the north and east, but maybe some like this back kind of building winds aimed at Hawaii, maybe providing some rideable surf there. All right, let's go take a look down at the surface and see what effect these winds have on the ocean surface. So here's our wave model. It's not ours, actually, it's NOAA's, and you're going, what's going on? Why aren't you showing me the Stormsurf wave model? Well, we had a little bit of a problem last Thursday. Literally, the server melted down. It completely fried. It's dead. So we thought we had a backup server. We thought we could fix it. That didn't work out. So we had to order a new server. Going to have to build it. So it's going to be probably till Thursday, Friday of next week till we're back up and running. So in the meantime, we'll use what we can. But the NOAA data is good. Now, these are not, the color scheme's all different now, too. These are meters, so we'll loosely interpret that. 9 meters is roughly right there. 9 meters, oh, hang on, maybe we can do it this way there. Oh, you can't see the timestamp. Okay, so 9 meters, call it 30-foot seas. You saw it earlier. We'll roll this out. You can see the big gale continues, but not producing anything really exceptional, and it's dead by the third. Continue on. Second gale starts building. Now, this guy, a little bit stronger, those small, supposedly with seas to about 44 feet. This is on the 5th, so what would that be? That'd be, let's see, about Wednesday, I believe. And then that rolls across the date line. Maybe actually, this is actually looking a little bit bigger than it was even on an earlier run. So that pushes across the date line. We'll get swell from that for sure for both Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast. Local winds cooperating is the big issue. And then yet another system behind that, a small one. It makes zero progress with like 39 to 40 foot seas. And then it fades out as we get towards the end of the week. And then one more behind that building. Here you go. But all the energy aimed to the north. So again, the issue is the jet stream, this brick wall, the split just east of the date line, limiting all activity to the West Pacific. And then let's take a look at winds relative to California and Hawaii. Right now, Hawaii not doing too bad. Relatively light trade wind situation. California, the exact opposite. Here's our high pressure. 1040 millibar high. Very strong. Just starting to build north winds along the California coast. You think it's windy now. It's only going to get more so as we get into Sunday afternoon. 35 knots, sustained winds, 30 knots from, we'll say, Point Reyes southward to Point Conception. Trades, though, relative for Hawaii, not too bad. 15 knots, we'll call it. We get into Monday, pretty much the same deal continues, though not as bad relative to California, but in terms of rideable, no, probably just a white cap mess. The good news is, actually, let's go down here. Real quick look. Southern California might even be affected. We'll say Monday morning. It looks like pretty good blow of north winds there on Monday. So probably a good day just to go to work and ignore the surf completely. As we get into Tuesday, then the wind situation starts backing off. Still strong north along the California coast. Southeast winds for Hawaii, 10 to 15 knots. That's about as ideal as you could probably want. Wednesday, finally, things let up for California. A northeasterly flow along the coast, pretty light. Now watch this front here. It's like a high-pressure front relative to Hawaii. It starts sweeping over the islands. 20-knot north winds as the winds let up in California on Thursday. And then we get into Friday. Again, a reasonable pattern for California. Hawaii still beset with north winds, not horribly strong, 15 knots, maybe 20 knots over on Kauai. And then we get into Saturday. The whole thing switches for California. More high pressure builds in, 1036 millibars. 25, 30 knot north winds again, building to 35 knots in the evening, and north winds with a cutoff low north of Hawaii. Nobody's winning come next weekend. And then we get into Sunday, even stronger winds forecast for the California coast at 30 to 35 knots, whereas the north winds continue at 15 knots for Hawaii. So the short of this, there's supposed to be some long-distance swell coming, but the wind pattern is just not good. Oh, look at this, 1042 millibar high setting up in the northern Gulf on Sunday night. Just not great, just a windy mess, and it's officially not the start of spring, but that's exactly what it looks like going on. When we get into the MJO forecast, so we'll talk a little bit more about what's going on here. And this is, maybe not the start of spring yet, but maybe just a pause in winter's action. So then what about snowfall potential? Well, typically when you have high pressure, especially as bulletproof as this, and you can see it just filling the Gulf, well, you don't get a whole lot of opportunity for snow. But you do get, if the high moves off, retrogrades to the west, then you get low pressure that rides up over the top of it and will come down the coast and with a lot dragging cold air with it, and you get the good odds for cold light snow into California. So a little bit of that is happening right now. By this evening, increased snow for, we'll call the the Tahoe region down into maybe Mammoth, but very quick and light, not a lot of precip, but the temperatures should be just about right. Light rain maybe for Cape Mendocino on Monday, and then everything just dries out. Here's California. We'll just blast through this. The short of it is, with high pressure in control, odds for precip are pretty low. The models are teasing maybe it's something a week out, Sunday, just a dusting of snow, we'll call it, maybe a little bit more for Tahoe south into the Central Sierra. And some of the models are suggesting Mammoth might kind of eke something out of it and make up for whatever, not a lot, but make up a little bit. In fact, let's go take a look. Here's the Squaw Valley dashboard. What do we have? Maybe 3 inches out of tonight's system and then nothing. And if you look at the temperature, here's the base of Squaw, here's the top. Above freezing temperatures for a good portion of the week, the whole way into next Sunday, and then you get another 3 inches or something like that. There it is. And then maybe some more beyond that. Okay, but nothing great, and it looks like a fair amount of wind associated with it too. Kirkwood, the same situation, maybe even less because they're on the south side of the lake. The further north you are, that's, it's the north-south angle of the storms coming down the Sierra. They ring out the majority. So Tahoe is the first high pass you're going to hit. It's going to ring out most of the moisture. And Kirkwood, being on the south, south of the South Lake, would get even less. Again, with the same big warming spurt in the middle of the week. And then Mammoth, next to nothing from this one, but maybe the weekend's system and beyond, a little bit better. Maybe a foot of snow over the following, 10 days out. But, would you believe a model that far? Really hard to say. Probably not. But at least there's some hope. All right, let's go take a look long term. What's going on with the MJO, the Madden-Julian oscillation? That'll dictate our weather for the next, in groups of 3 or 4 weeks at a time. So the first three or 4 weeks out, and then maybe a change for the following 3 or 4 weeks after that. And of course, long term, what's going on with El Nino or La Nina? So first off, the MJO exercise. We like to look at winds across the equator, specifically over the West Pacific. So here's the East Pacific here, here's the West Pacific here, there's the equator, there's the date line right there. We're looking at winds. In the East Pacific, winds are pretty strong out of the east. We're just looking at the arrows. They continue over the date line and into an area we call the Kelvin wave generation area, the far West Pacific, from 135 east to 170 west, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. If you get westerly anomalies in this area, that is not necessarily west winds, though you see we have east winds in the Kelvin wave generation area, but light west winds on the southern side of the Kelvin wave generation area. If you get west anomalies in this area, then you can take warm water that's typically in this area, it starts pushing it to the east under the equator and creates what's known as a Kelvin wave. And we all know that Kelvin waves, they take about 3 months to traverse the Pacific, but when they do erupt over Ecuador, if they're strong enough and the conditions are right, and you get multiples of them in succession, that can help to create El Nino. And if nothing else, just the creation of Kelvin waves sort of keeps, maybe not gets you to El Nino, but keeps warm water in the equatorial Pacific off of Peru, and that in turn can help influence the precip pattern in winter months for California. All right. So, it's not so much the actual winds, it's the anomalies. Differences from normal for this time of year. And this data is from the TAO buoy array, a series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. All right, so looking at the arrows, we see, and we're just looking at the winds blowing from the east to the west. The north-south component doesn't matter nearly as much. Pretty much neutral winds. Yeah, these winds are strong out of the east, but that's pretty normal for this time of year. You get even to the date line, same deal. And then in the Kelvin wave generation area right in here, you see, weakly out of the west. Is this a sign of the active phase of the MJO? Probably not. If anything, it's the fading part of the MJO, but we'll get into that in a second. All right, what's the forecast? And what's the hindcast for that matter? So what is this chart? This is the whole planet on one chart. It's 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. Fancy words for winds up about 4,700 feet in the atmosphere, but a good proxy for what's going on at the surface. And these are the anomalies. It's not the actual winds. It's are they blowing harder from the west or harder from the east than normal? And that's what is used to tease out whether the MJO is in the active state or in the inactive state. And of course, in the active state, that's the MJO, when in the active state, transports energy to the jet stream. The jet stream, in turn, helps feed storm production. That gets rid of that split pattern off of California, feeds energy in over the date line into the Gulf of Alaska, and that makes surf. All right, so whole planet on one chart. Looking down here, the Kelvin wave generation goes, or actually the Pacific starts about there and goes to about over here, right? But it's the Kelvin wave generation area. That's what we're really looking at for the active phase of the MJO between here and 170 west to 135 east. So here to here, and you just go right up the chart. The reds and any shades of the reds are the westerly anomalies. So what do we have? Starting January 13th, westerly anomalies developed in the Kelvin wave generation area and continued until today. Okay, but we're really strong through January 28th. Westerly wind burst probably help feed, is working to develop a Kelvin wave. But if you also recall, we've been on a pretty good long run of surf the entire month of January. I forget, it started somewhere around the 7th of January, something like that, and was solid up till maybe a couple of days ago, something like that, which maps really well with the active phase of the MJO. So you can literally, if you know the active phase is coming, they typically last 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks if you're lucky, and that's when you get your surf. That's when the jet stream is fed. You know the story. All right, so we've been in the active phase. Here we are today, and it looks like it's in another 1, 2, 3 days. It'll be all but gone. jet stream wise, we're already there. The jet stream split. And if anything, easterly anomalies are going to be developing, we'll say about the first week in February, let's say the 5th or so. And that's probably a sign of the inactive phase of the MJO. Let's dig deeper. All right, more forecast data concerning the MJO. What is this? Outgoing long-wave radiation in 5-day increments. So day 5, day 10, day 15. All right, so the blue represents negative numbers. What's that mean? Less sunlight reflectivity off the ocean's surface. Outgoing long-wave radiation, right? Meaning cloud cover. And basically the active phase of the MJO is like a low pressure system. And the Kelvin wave generation area is right in this area. Like there's South America, Central America, the equator, EQ, right there. Dateline right there, 180 west. So Kelvin wave generation area right in that area. According to this, the statistic model, we're in some weak phase of the active phase of the MJO, and it's supposed to hold for the next 15 days. Now, the dynamic model says, yeah, we're kind of in that, but 5 days from now it's supposed to be gone, and if anything, the inactive phase magically just blooms and then starts easing its way out of the picture 2 weeks from now, while the active phase builds over the maritime continent and starts easing into the West Pacific. So there is considerable disagreement between the two models as to what the forecast is going to be regarding the MJO. So let's take a look at phase diagrams, a little bit different view, but the same deal. Statistic model here, dynamic model here. This circle, assume you're looking down from above the Earth, above the North Pole, looking down on the North Pole. The equator is around the outside of the chart, okay? And the MJO moves from west to east, from the Indian Ocean, over the maritime continent, across the West Pacific, underneath the United States, across the Atlantic, over North Africa, and back to the Indian Ocean. The MJO, so if the active phase is here, the inactive phase is typically on the other side of the planet. And the two of them rotate around the planet on the equator, west to east. All right, so where is the active phase? The active phase is where the heavy dot is, which says it's in the West Pacific, but it's very weak. And according to the statistic model, it's supposed to stay weak and move into the Atlantic over the next 15 days. And that's it. This line here is what the active phase did back in January 7th, 8th. You see, the further away from the circle, the stronger it was. So in January, we had a strong active phase of the MJO over the West Pacific, and that's what made all the surf in January. Makes perfect sense. The forecast now, the GEFS model, a dynamic model, says the starting place is exactly the same thing, but that the active phase is to quickly sort of back retrograde into the maritime continent, then start building and be strong 15 days from now. Not strong, but we'll call it moderate, somewhere just entering the West Pacific. So clearly, this is the outcome that we want. We don't want to see what the statistic model has to offer. But is the dynamic model right? Well, who knows? We'll just look at some more data and see if we can tease out something that makes sense. So here's upper level data. We'll call it potential for precipitation. The oranges and the yellows, not favorable for precipitation, and one could loosely equate that with the inactive phase of the MJO. The greens, the active phase of the MJO, and heavy precipitation. So there's South America, there's New Guinea, here's the equator, dateline probably somewhere in this region. Right now, this, according to the statistic model, is the inactive phase building over the West Pacific, and you can see it slowly working its way across the Pacific, finally pushing into Central America on the 13th of March. The active phase, according to this, sort of tries to get together sometime in late February, easing into the Pacific, Central Pacific at the end of the model run, but not very strong. So that's not particularly heartening. Then this is the CFS model here. Zonal wind anomalies again, the west component of the wind. Backtrack look in history. Here's January. Oh, and again, Whole planet on one chart, Kelvin wave generation area between this tick mark and about here going straight up the chart. So right here, you see the solid contour. This was the active phase of the MJO in January with strong westerly anomalies. That's what fed energy to the jet, gave us all our surf. And then it faded. Today, the dotted contour, this is the inactive phase, but it looks like a pretty weak inactive phase. Only one contour setting up today in the Kelvin wave generation area. By February 15th, it's supposed to be moving out of the Kelvin wave generation area, but what's also interesting is westerly anomalies are supposed to continue. Normally when you get the inactive phase of the MJO, like here, you see the western anomalies die, and the blues or easterly anomalies even set up. Well, that's not even really, there's a little area of easterly anomalies there, but westerly anomalies holding in the Kelvin wave generation area. So that sort of explains why, at least for the next week, gale after gale continues in the West Pacific, but the westerly anomalies aren't strong enough, don't cover enough area to feed enough energy into the jet stream to get it to pull together into the Gulf of Alaska. And then when we get into later in February, we'll say maybe the 22nd or so, westerly anomalies start building, you see, and filling even the whole way to California. The active phase, this solid contour, starts developing. So it looks like we're kind of down for, surprise, surprise, about 3 weeks till the 20th of February, and then the active phase returns, and then the storm production returns. So the short of it is, if you're trying to plan your life, well, the next 3 weeks are a good time to take care of business, go do what you need to do, and clear the decks for, let's say, starting later in the month into the early part of March. And then yet one more model. This is, again, the CFS model, but goes out 3 months. Whole planet on one chart, Kelvin wave generation area from this tick mark to this tick mark going up the chart. But past history is at the bottom. The forecast is moving forward. Here is that big westerly wind burst and active phase of the MJO that happened in January. Here's where we are today. We'll overlay the MJO. Here's our active phase, the solid contour fading out. The dotted contour is the inactive phase. It looks to be rather short-lived. By February 18th, it's done. Then a weaker active phase sets up here in the Kelvin wave generation area and goes into maybe March 5th or so, followed by westerly anomalies, pretty decent westerly anomalies set up, though not as strong as what some of the earlier runs of the model were suggesting. In fact, let's see if we can do this. Here we go. So that is the latest member. It's actually very weak, but a week before that, stronger westerly anomalies were forecast, and a week before that, very strong westerly anomalies were forecast, and then before that. So this is sort of an average of all of them, but the trend, this is the little scary part, suggests that maybe the most recent set of data suggests that maybe this active phase isn't going to do much, if anything. In fact, I need to put there we go. There is the actual MJO signature according to that member. But we're looking at sort of an average because this thing is pretty noisy. It jumps all over the place from week to week. So we'll do an average. All right, so we'll call it a modest active phase of the MJO in mid to late February and early March, followed by the inactive phase, and then followed by another active phase after that. All right, let's overlay the low-pass filter. This is a low-pressure bias. The solid contour suggests a low-pressure bias. It has been in place all winter, but it's pretty weak. It's not... If this is really strong, you have El Nino, but we don't know anything like that. Just sort of a general, it says a tendency in the atmosphere towards El Nino, but we're going to get into a little bit more thinking on that in a second. The dotted contour, this is the Indian Ocean over here. High pressure bias and control of the Indian Ocean with easterly anomalies. Latest data suggests that pattern and drought in Australia is to continue for the foreseeable future. All right, so now to the longer-term forecast, El Nino, La Nina. First thing we start looking at, of course, MJO can play a component in it, but let's see what the ocean's doing. Subsurface temperatures specifically. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. Data from the TAO buoy array again. These are the Anchor lines on the TAO buoys strung across the Pacific. The X's are the sensors on those anchor lines. They collect data, they radio or beam it up to the satellite. It lands somewhere over in Maryland. They take it, run it against a model, fill in the gaps, and this suggests, and this is water temperature in centigrade, so you could take the temperatures. This is let's see. Oh, there's the scale. Sorry. It's about 30 degrees, something like 30-degree isotherm right here. Anyway, if you really want to do it, add 32 degrees to 30 and multiply that times 1.8, and you'll get the temperature in Fahrenheit. All right, so 30-degree isotherm here. It's actually moving to the east a little. We're looking again for the presence of Kelvin waves, or what's the trend? Is warm water moving off to the east? 29-degree isotherm, looking pretty solid at 172 today, pretty much unchanged. The 28-degree isotherm at 163, that is unchanged, and the 24-degree isotherm still pushing into Ecuador. So no signs of La Nina here. And maybe some weak signs of, well, let's just go look at what really matters. The anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year. Again, West Pacific here, East Pacific here. What is this? 4 degrees, a ball of 4 degree above normal temperature. That's a Kelvin wave. Produced by not only the westerly wind burst that occurred in January, because if that were the case, the warm water would still be organizing here, but there was another westerly wind burst before that. I think it was in early December, something like that. The two of them are sort of combining to take whatever warm water is left over here, make a Kelvin wave, and you can see a stream. There was a previous, so this is Kelvin wave number 6. I think Kelvin wave number 5, and you'll see in a minute, is pushing into Ecuador. So the Kelvin wave flow is open, no signs of La Nina, but not particularly a robust pattern. In fact, here's another image. Let's see if we can zoom this in a little bit. All right, there you go. Yet different model, same data showing actually a stronger warm water flow pushing into Ecuador. And the Kelvin wave here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 3.5 degrees above normal and some 3.5 degree temperature pushing into Ecuador. Pretty, the whole Pacific basically above 150 meters is warmer than normal. Not a bad situation. And one more confirmation of sea subsurface temperatures is by using Jason 3 satellite data. You strip out all the waves, the swells, the wind waves, the tides. We're looking for a bump on the ocean surface on the equator. Here's the equator. There's the date line there. Wherever warm water is, it expands, creates a little bump on the ocean surface. And the satellite is so sensitive, it can find literally a 5-centimeter bump. That's what, not very much, something like that on the ocean surface, suggesting warm water depth. So confirming that there is some sort of a Kelvin wave under the dateline here, and it's easing off to the east, just like we saw in the previous images. Upper ocean heat anomalies. All right, so this was, Kelvin wave number 4? I've lost track. Maybe it's 4, maybe it's 5 back a year ago. This is the West Pacific here, East Pacific here. This is warm water moving from the West Pacific to the East Pacific last winter. Then we had 2 stalled Kelvin waves that developed in the summertime, and cool water developed off of Ecuador here. And that was kind of a concern. We're going, what's going on? Are we getting into La Nina? But no, then we got into the fall. Another Kelvin wave developed. It made it the whole way across the Pacific. It is impacting Ecuador still at this point in time. And then here is our next Kelvin wave, number 6 or 7. And you can see it started in November, so there might have been as many as 3 different westerly wind bursts, active phases of the MJO that have contributed to this Kelvin wave, and it's trying to ease off to the east. The question is it going to do like these guys and stall, or is it actually going to have a little bit more energy behind it? Sort of hard to know, but at least it's trying. All right, let's go look at the ocean surface. What's actually going on? This is sea surface temperature anomalies. It's not actual water temperature. It's the differences from normal for this time of year. And we see warm water building along Peru, Chile, Ecuador, all up into Central America. That's good news. That's from that Kelvin wave, that flow of warm water that's under the equator. It hits here and it's got to do something, so it gurgles to the surface and then spreads north and south. So we see pretty good traction for that happening. But what is kind of concerning here is you actually look along the equator and there's really not any warm water there at all. It's neutral, if anything. It appears to be almost moving towards cool. And this is the fading warm water from previous El Nino or something that was like El Nino last winter. Here's the temperature trend for the past 7 days. It was actually, we had stronger warming 3 or 4 days ago along Peru here, Chile, up into Ecuador. Still warming, but not as warm as it was. But there's no real cooling indicated either, so not too bad. And then, of course, the real trend, what's going on? Sea surface temperature anomalies over the whole Pacific Basin. The Nino 1.2 region, sort of a noise region, but we follow a lot. And we're getting a better sense of, what to look for in this region. So it's basically bounded right in this area, okay? You see the warm water off of Peru and Chile and all, in the Central America. And you see warm water trying to work its way along the equator. But this guy right here, this pocket of cool water, it's been here. It was there last summer. It's been here all winter. And we think that it's not just 5 degrees north and south of the equator that really matter, but it's maybe a broader area in the Nino 1.2 region that helped define the rainfall pattern for California in the winter months. And if you have a summer with cool water here and a winter with cool water here, well, if you're in La Nina, you'll have cool water here, but it'll also be streaming along the equator too. You'll get a big, cool stream all in this area. Well, we don't have that, but this guy we think is definitely contributing. We have our Kelvin waves, we have all this stuff going on, we have a low pressure bias, over in the atmosphere over the dateline region. Everything sort of seems primed to get swell production, but if you look at on the whole, the swell pattern this winter hasn't been great. It's been okay. There's been waves. We've been through a pretty good run. And the rainfall pattern into California is nothing like El Nino. It started out with a good burst, but right now we're down some. We're at 75% of normal for water content at this time of year and rapidly going backwards, not forwards, since there hadn't been any storms. And the high pressure's in control, north winds, and all those kind of things that typically La Nina looks like. And we think this guy right here is contributing a lot to that, and he has been steady there since June or July, something like that, and really not changed at all. So for the future, keep your eye on this region. If you see it warm down here, that's a good sign. Warm for months on end, especially in the summer months. But if you see it cool, then that would kind of dampen one's forecast for the coming winter. All right, let's move on. So one other indicator, what's going on in the atmosphere? We use the Southern Oscillation Index, the difference in pressure between Tahiti and Darwin, right? If the index, the daily contribution is negative, that means there's lower pressure over Tahiti. And one day doesn't make a difference, but it's over months or even over weeks, let's say. Okay, if it's consistently negative, let's see, is there anywhere down here? Well, here we go. We had nope, not even there. When we were in the active phase of the MJO, typically this will run negative. This column will run negative. All through January, though, yeah, we were negative a bit. So that suggests it maybe wasn't that strong of an active phase of the MJO. Today, we're at minus 13.59. We've been negative for 3 days, but we know we're not in the active phase of the MJO by all the other data. So this is more than likely just an anomaly. This data is very noisy. The 30-day average gives you probably is more your active phase, inactive phase indicator. Today, the value is plus 0.77 and has been steady. Now, you see back in January, it was negative, but even then, in the core of January, here we go. In early January, it was negative, and it's been rising nonstop since then. If you get positive, then that's a sign, or if it's steadily rising, that's a sign of the inactive phase of the MJO. Looks like we're there. 90-day average is your El Nino indicator. Today, minus 5.06. What was it? It was minus 6.57. You got to be down at 15 for El Nino. And if you're in the plus 5 to 10 region, you're in La Nina. So we're still not in La Nina territory. We're weekly negative. Not as negative as we were a month ago, and not as negative as we were 3 or 4 months ago. We were down at 0.8, something like that. So this still looks like we're kind of in the recovery from last year's El Nino. We haven't swung to La Nina. We're just sort of hanging, somewhere in the middle. All right, so where are we? What's really going on? Well, for sure right now, we think we're in the inactive phase of the MJO. All the models basically say that. How long will it last? How strong will it be? Could be a week, could be 3 weeks, but we think by the 20th to 25th of February, that'll be over. We'll be moving towards the active phase. The jet stream will wake up a little bit more. The split will heal a little bit, and then maybe we'll get the opportunity for some precip into California, assuming that cool pocket off of Peru will let things happen. It's a big unknown, but it's biasing things towards the dry end, we suspect. Anyway, surf, more than likely the latter part of the month into the early part of March, and then we get into spring. We suspect it will be if what's going on right now is any kind of an indicator, we suspect it'll be pretty windy, high pressure, ugly spring pattern for the California coast. Hawaii, probably not so much of an impact. February, the end part of February is probably our last big hurrah for this winter. Make the most of it that you can. Snow-wise, the pattern is everything was driving up into the Whistler area, and we think that's still the case. You can go look at the snow models on Stormsurf to pick out all the details. But for right now, it looks like if you're going on a ski trip, go north. The further north, the better. All right, and long term after that, well, we didn't look at the models, but the actual long-term trend is still suggesting, at least per the CFS model, to a move towards La Nina next year, or I would say starting sometime in the June over the summer time frame. Now, the other models are still holding, saying, no, we're just going to hang neutral. So it's way too early to tell. You get in what they call the spring unpredictability barrier, and that runs through like mid-March into somewhere in the early June. And the models have a really hard time figuring out what's going on. So we're not quite there yet, but it's probably too early to know what the case is going to be. But it wouldn't be surprising if we move towards a cool phase for a year or two. All right, so that's it for this week. If you enjoyed the video, of course, hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. You'll get notifications every time we publish the forecast, which is typically on Sundays, sometime in the day or the evening, typically in the evening. And then, of course, you can always go to stormsurf.com. All the data's there, and you can keep up to date yourself. Or you can just wait till Sunday, and we'll do it for you. All right, so that's it for this week. We'll do it again next week. Same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.